to what we've already given up. It's like we're pacing around the obvious. Separate lives, different stories, 2 out of 4 of us are all fed up. Well, you and I play with fire, but don't say nothing, or we're both busted. We'll get what's coming after you. Hey, hey. No, don't say nothing, or bon voyage to rendezvous. Trade fights for better views. We both need something new. Maybe we should just tell them. She didn't think I was somebody. So long to rendezvous. So long to.
Hello, hive-minded readers, and welcome to the Books and the Bees podcast. Just like bees play a crucial role in pollinating flowers and sustaining life, books pollinate minds and nurture the soul. We see the connection between the two, the delicate dance of ideas and stories that enrich our lives.
I'm Cody.
And I'm Hailey.
Welcome to the first episode
of our podcast.
We did it together. Hello. Hi. Welcome to the first episode of our podcast.
Hello.
Hailey, how are you today?
I'm good. Warmer than I have been, so that's good.
Yeah, it's been really, really cold.
It's been frigid.
Yeah. Luckily we just got rain today, so it should be better, but it's been a really, really cold couple weeks, but good reading time actually.
Yeah, it's beautiful weather for reading. Perfect. Staying inside.
I actually finished 2 books in the last 2 days. That's how much of a reading mood I'm in right now, thanks to the weather. So I feel good about that.
Yeah, that's some pretty good progress.
Yeah.
That's so good.
It is. It's really good. Plus, one was a novella, so it doesn't, it was a short book, but still pretty good.
Still counts.
Yeah. Well, do we want to start with what we're reading?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. You go first, Hailey.
Okay. So currently I do a dual read most of the time, where I read at least 2 books at a time. But currently the one that I would like to talk about is the book Crossed by Emily McIntyre. She is a beautiful author. She writes realizations of villains, their happy endings. They're happily ever after, and she reimagines fairy tales that like we grew up on. We meaning like millennials, I believe would be the term. But yeah, she wrote Crossed, and it's the latest in a 5-book series. They don't really like all flow together, but they're of the same sort of mind when you're reading them. So the book is told through the villain's perspective. And I just grabbed the summary because I didn't want to butcher it. So it's as follows. It's a dark reimagining of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's a fairy tale. In this story, Father Cade is the priest with a dark side. He battles these inner monsters that make him crave depravity because he was told that from when he was little. And then there's another character. Her name's Amaya, and she's an exotic dancer with a troubled past. It's really good so far. I'm probably not even halfway through the book yet, but it's very dark. It is a romance. It's very spicy, and I really love the way that she writes spice. So, yeah, that's what I'm currently reading. And the other book that I'm reading is Iron Flame, but I'm not done with it yet, and I have a lot of thoughts. So.
Ooh,
yeah.
Iron Flame.
I know.
Which I've read. I've completed Iron Flame for our listeners. So I'm waiting for Hailey to finish it so that we can talk about it. But
yes,
yeah, we both have thoughts on it.
It's a long time coming.
I just looked up I was thinking of a different book when you were talking about this. And have you read the like Twisted Tale versions of like Disney villains? Do you know what I'm talking about?
It sounds familiar.
One of them, the first one I've seen is called As Old as Time. And it's like, what if Belle's mother cursed the beast is the tagline.
Oh, wow.
And it sounds really good. I don't know if it's romancy, but it does sound kind of in the same bent.
It does.
Yeah.
That sounds super interesting.
I've never read any of them, but there's a bunch. So we should check this out.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look.
Yeah. Okay, well, I can talk about what I'm reading, which is one of the books that I finished just the other day. It's called The Deep Sky by Yume Kitase. And it is a very fun, fast-paced sci-fi novel about basically the Earth has come to its end thanks to global warming and all the effects that humans currently are doing on our planet. And the society, hosted by this trillionaire, whose name I don't remember, has decided to send a ship full of about 80 people to a planet they've discovered to be similar to Earth. And it's basically the last shot that humanity has at surviving. And the political climate is in such a way that the people who are on the ship are sponsored by the different countries. So China and the United States have the most, and then a few other countries have quite a few. And the story revolves around the main character being Asuka, who is half Japanese, half American. And she ends up being the Japanese sponsor to go on this spaceship. And she's actually what they called an alternate, which she wasn't originally chosen, but somebody backed out. And so she took their spot. And it's a really, really fun, fast-paced novel. It's kind of like a mystery whodunit, while also a huge commentary on just what it's like with humanity right now, kind of destroying the planet. And I really, really enjoyed it. I read it in 2 days. It's a kind of a short book. It's only like 300 pages, but really, really fun to read. And I think if I read it last year, I would have put it in my best of 2023 for sure.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds epic.
Oh, it was so much fun to read. So much fun to read.
That sounds like really, yeah, that sounds so interesting.
I actually almost cried at the end of it. Like I was tearing up at the
Oh,
end of this book.
really?
It was so good. Yeah. Oh,
Ooh.
yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, it takes a lot for me to for books to get me, but I love a book that can, you know, s- bring up some emotions and
Yeah.
stuff. That's really cool.
Yeah. No, I totally recommend it for the sci-fi, like dystopia fans out there. Really, really
Yeah.
highly recommend. Yeah.
Oh man.
Super fun.
That's such a good genre too. Lots of good books in that genre.
Yeah, it is. Definitely. A lot of fun books in that genre. Absolutely. Okay, so I think now we're just going to talk about the podcast, and
Yeah.
it's pretty casual because it's our first episode. We can really do whatever we want to.
Yes.
But I think we've kind of met and talked about objectives that we want to do, and I
Mhm.
think what you can expect as a listener is we're going to go over new books and books that are exciting to us, and we're going to talk about them. Maybe we'll do like books where we read together and discuss them on the pod. That'd be kind of fun
Mhm.
to do.
That would be fun.
We've also read some books overlapping, but we don't actually have a lot of our Venn diagram of reading is pretty small, I would say, in the middle part. Would
Yeah.
you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
Because you're a
pretty
pretty
different.
heavy romance reader, right?
Yeah, especially lately, yeah.
Yeah, I do dabble in romance, especially the romantasy, the like fantasy
Mhm.
romance now that they're calling it. But
Mhm.
a lot of my books are genre specific, so be fun to kind of hear each other's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it'd be great.
Yeah. We also will probably have some tips on improving reading, like getting out of
Mhm.
a book slump, or I actually saw this really cool tech thing where you can buy a stand for your Kindle to like hold over your bed. So you don't have to like hold your Kindle
Oh, that's neat.
when it's cold outside. So you can just like, you have a little remote that you just click it and then it just holds it in front of your face. So you can have your hands under the covers and just read your book that way.
Wow.
I really want to try it out.
That's really funny because I just saw a reel or something that a gal had, those like magnifying glasses where they almost like mirror and so you can like look a certain way and then you can adjust them so that they can see like what you're reading basically so you don't have to
Hmm.
move your head. So
Hmm.
she had it set up so she didn't have to move her head. She could lay down, the mirrors would happen in her glasses, whatever they were. And then she had her Kindle set up in front of her, like on a stand, and then the clicker in her hand. So she just was like laying down completely reading. It wasn't, I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, that's incredible.
I
And where
love
do I
that.
find that?
Yeah. Yeah,
But yeah,
we're gonna have to do that for sure.
oh, for sure.
Yeah. So we'll have tips. We'll maybe do some tech reviews. We could do questions. We have an email that we'll talk
Mhm.
about. You can email us and we can answer questions. Maybe that'd be really fun.
And an Instagram.
And an Instagram, do you know the handle? Do you remember the handle?
Yes, I have it pulled up right now. It's Books and the Bees Pod, BOOKSANDTHEBEESPOD, all
There you
one
go.
word, no numbers.
So follow us on that. I don't know anything about it. Haley's all the social media guru. I don't even touch Instagram anymore. But
Don't
yeah.
blame you.
Actually, I didn't mind Instagram. It was really Facebook and Twitter or X, whatever they call it now.
Same.
Those were the ones that I really couldn't stand anymore. So maybe I'll pop in on Instagram and just do that. But and I guess
Instagram
TikTok. I
can
do
be.
TikTok. So
Yeah, same. But mine's a personal TikTok, so
yeah, mine's too. I get TikTok. We're going to talk about book talk a lot. I feel like book
oh
talk's
yeah.
a huge thing right now, and
Maybe we'll
we
have to
both
make a TikTok at some point.
we. I'm not going to agree to that on the podcast, but we we
Nothing
could
in writing.
potentially do a book talk
Yes.
for
It's a
sure.
thought.
That's a thought. Yeah. And we are, as you like the name being Books and the Bees, we are probably going to talk about romance books, but we're not exclusively going to be romance. Haley's a big romance reader. I'm a casual, I would say, romance reader. So we'll probably have a decent amount of romance discussion, but not the full thing we're going to do is romance, right? You agree
Yeah.
with that? Yeah,
Yeah, I think that could probably get pretty exhaustive. So
that's true. There's so much romance out there, though. I mean, we could.
there is.
I really want to read the I don't know what you call them, like the dinosaur romance books. You know,
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking
I just
about.
want to read one. I just want to see the hype. I feel like
There,
everybody talks about them.
yeah, same. And there's some like gargoyles out there. Some Listen, the gargoyle series back when I was a kid had me in its clutches. It
You read it
had
when you
me
were a
by
kid?
no, the Gargoyles TV series. So anything
Oh,
gargoyle
okay.
since then, I'm like, sign me up. Hell yeah.
That's freaking funny. I have never been a gargoyle fan. I don't think I've ever read a single gargoyle book in my whole life, but to read the romance, I think that would be fun.
Oh yeah. Could
I
get
almost read an
interesting.
Amish romance once. They call them bonnet busters, I think is what they call
That's so
them.
funny. Bonnet
I've
Busters. Let's
I've heard that
go.
the romance is off the page, but it's
Oh,
just how do you not want to read a book that's called a bonnet buster? I mean, that just sounds like so much fun.
exactly.
So
Gosh.
yeah, we'll probably be dabbling in some of those fun books.
I'm down.
And we have I don't know what we want to call it, a spicy scale, a honey scale, a spicy honey scale
Yeah.
to
You know.
talk about the spice level, honey level.
uh,
Do you want to introduce the honey scale for
Yeah,
us?
yeah, I can do the honey scale. So, right when we're thinking honey, we're thinking warm, we're thinking cold, maybe it's crystallized, but you always like a little bit of sweetness when you romance, right? So, we do have the honey scale. Uh, Number one is the honey drizzle. It's just a sweet embrace, tender touch of romance, like honey drizzling gently. So, nothing too crazy, right? And then the nectar nuzzle, a gentle sweetness that warms the heart. We're talking those books where you just kind of come back to it if you just want something a little warm, a little cozy. And then we have the hive hug. That's number three on the 5-point scale. It's a buzzing bond, a moderate level of romance, creating a pleasant hum. So we're not talking the spice, quite yet. We're not talking anything too wild. And then we have number four, Beekeeper's Passion. We got the spiced honey, intense and flavorful with a kick of passion. I'm trying to think of like books that we could eventually kind of give as examples for
Yeah.
each of these because I think that might give the listeners a little bit of a reference, right? Um, and then number five, I believe is number five, Honeyed Frenzy. Inferno of intimacy, explicit scenes that set the pages ablaze. So when I think of honeyed frenzy, I'm just going to reference back to Emily McIntyre. Chef's kiss. The way she writes some of the spice scenes, just yum. Um, that I would consider a honeyed frenzy. Things like the Den of Vipers, Honey Frenzy for sure. If any of the listeners know or have read or heard of Den of Vipers, that is where the spice is spicin'. But yeah, so that's our honey scale and level
Now
of
it'd probably
reference.
be different for me because I the scale for me, I think A Court of Silver Flames, which is book 5 of Akatar.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know, A Court of Thorns and Roses, the last book, is the spiciest of the series. I think
Mm-hmm.
everybody agrees with that. For me, I would put that at Honeyed Frenzy, which I don't think Haley would, right?
No, no. Maybe like a beekeeper's passion. It's still got
Okay.
she
Okay.
the way that Sarah J. Maas writes romance and spice scenes, um, it's pretty uh well written, I'll say. My
Well written
opinion.
for sure.
Well written.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the Bonnet Buster off the page romance would be a honey drizzle, like low
Okay.
key, nothing, on the page.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing too wild, too
And we
explicit.
talked, yeah, yeah. We talked about Fourth Wing, which we both read.
Yes.
And I think we both agreed that that was like a level 3 hive
Yeah.
hug. Is
Mm-hmm.
that right? Yeah. Okay. Just to give a little bit of a taste on what we think. But it's gonna be different for us. It's gonna be different for
Right.
you as the listener. So
Mm-hmm.
feel free to use it as you please.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think that's about what we want to talk about as far as the podcast goes. Is there anything else you want to add, Haley?
No, I don't have
I think
anything.
we're gonna play it by ear, and
Yeah.
as we get more listeners and as we get into our groove a little bit. This is
Mm-hmm.
our first episode, so it's probably slightly different than the way we're going to be down the line.
Yeah.
I think we can modify it, but we're going to be pretty casual and just have fun, I think, is our plan.
Yeah. And we'll be ever
So
evolving. And a
that's
caveat that all of these opinions stated are purely our opinions. If you disagree or agree, that's on you. Just our opinions.
that's true, and we're not going to try to yuck anybody's yum. We're not going to
No.
judge
Yeah.
anybody, so don't judge us.
Yeah. We don't kink shame up in here.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But if a book's not your forte, then it's not your forte.
Yeah.
So that's just how the world is.
Exactly.
Okay, well let's dive into more about ourselves and our reader journey and our
Mm-hmm.
how we like to read. Haley, do you want to introduce yourself and your reader journey?
Yeah. So my journey started off probably similarly to a lot of avid readers. I grew up reading books, lots of books. My mom read to me as a kid in her spare time. Every night, though, she would make sure to read things like we read the Little Bear book series. We read things like Biscuit. We read things like Junie B. Jones. I mean, just, a lot of different books, different genres, all pretty age appropriate. But yeah, she would spend some time reading to me when I was growing up. Dr. Seuss, that sort of stuff. Um, and then so in like school, I was one of those quote unquote gifted kids uh, who excelled in reading at a young age. And then I ended up reading, and I don't know if any of our listeners are familiar with the AR reading scale or system, but in school, we had this thing called AR reading, accelerated reader. And they like tracked you based on like how many books and what level of retention you were reading these books at, the comprehension level, that sort of thing, because you take like tests or whatever. And then after each book, and you had like points and stuff and school rewards, that sort of whole shebang. Um, and so I started testing super high in like fourth, fifth grade. I was reading at like a supposed college level, right? Like it's not like I was reading physical college books, so that was not happening. But my like comprehension skills were at a supposed college level. I use air quotes. I'm quoting currently because I feel like a lot of that is pretty socioeconomically biased,
That's
that
true.
sort of thing.
That's true.
So I always lean in with that kind of caveat. But yeah, and then Growing up, I was privileged enough to have family members. My uncle, he got me my first library card. He, would take me to the library. Any little moments we had, he would take me to our public library, and I would just you know, go buck wild in those, library. I was probably taking home two, three, four books, like as many as they let me. I would take. I would check out of the library to read, and I would read those books. And then, yeah, and then that kind of evolved into my grandma, my beloved since past grandma. She had a huge love for reading, and she we've started reading books together. It started with the Lemony Snicket series, in like, I don't know, like, what was it, like sixth grade? I would think I was in sixth grade when we started reading, and during the summers we would read a few books out of the series in the summers. And I have a very vivid memory of us. She made pasta puttanesca, which is mentioned in the Lemony Snicket series. I think it's like in the first book they make pasta puttanesca, and so we like sat and ate that, and then we would discuss the books that we would read, which was cool. And then that kind of led into like other more mature books as I got older. We read the Marked series together, which is like, I don't know if our listeners have ever heard of the Marked series. I should probably look up who it's from, but there's a bunch in the series, and they are definitely YA. And sorry, my dog's click clacking in the back. Yeah, it was definitely YA, and boy howdy, did me and my grandma have some very interesting conversations regarding
PC
those
Cast, is that
books.
the author?
I think
PC
so.
Cast.
That sounds
Okay,
right.
yeah.
That does sound right. Yeah. And so yeah, that was that was my reading journey. And then obviously, in high school I started reading more YA, but I also read like sci-fi. I did note some books. City of Bones, I read the Immortal Instruments series. And then my mom read those after I did. I really love, so like in school, you know how they make you read certain books. I really loved the Of Mice and Men book. uh
Hmm.
wasn't a big fan of most of the like books that they force you to read, but that one was really good, and we saw a play on it, which was also really cool. um and then, yeah, I also noted Sarah Dressen books. They're like romance books, but YA, I think. I could be wrong though on the YA part. But yeah, I mean, shoot, like everything from like Boxcar Children, The Click, Goosebumps. There was these books called The Diaries, and they're like historical fiction, but they were written in like a journalistic style. It was very cool. Uh,
Oh.
yeah, the Ugly series, The Host, Dear John,
Hmm.
Sarah
Hmm.
Dressen books. Yeah, and then college happened, and let me tell you how soul sucking it can be to get into college and think that you're going to maintain the level of reading, only to be hit with these horribly boring, awful textbooks that you have to read. And they are not written in any sort of shape or form that is, uh, at least to me, I found all of them extremely boring. There was one book that I must mention that was pretty integral to my degree and my philosophy changing, and it was the New Jim Crow. And let me make sure that I note the author, because I feel like that's really important. Um, Bear with me for a second while I find it in my library. But that the New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Incredible book. Um, it'll it's a good read. I would recommend it for any listeners out there who want to unravel their knowledge of current like socioeconomic type um, philosophies. Uh, But yeah, so I was sucked dry in college from all of my willingness to read. And um, I went from reading like probably like, I don't know, 20 books a year to about zero. I did mention in the beginning that I read the True Blood series, the Sookie Stackhouse series, very early on, like my first year. I think it was my first year of college, and those were good. And that was probably the last series that I read as far as like books go, um, until 2022. Um, so yeah, not even like during the pandemic did I crack open fiction. Uh, and yeah, that 2022, I picked up the book. And now my brain's going blank of what the book is called because I'm on the spot. Because I was literally just talking about it. We just were discussing how like impactful it was on my reading. It was The Night and Its Moon by
Oh
Piper
yeah.
CJ, and what a great read. I'm still waiting to finish the rest of the series because as a reader, my kind of reading habits are if something's not if something is in a series and the series isn't out all the way and I can't get my hands on the rest of the series, it's really hard for me to keep going in that series. Which obviously no fault to the authors. They can't just like churn out books like that, but just my reading habits personally. And there was a chapter in that book, and it was chapter 4, page like 78. And yeah, the way she writes a certain concept, it was just like life changing. At least for me, that that caveat. Just for me, it was life changing, and it sparked my passion for reading again. Yeah, and that was my kind of journey back into it, and then Akatar kind of solidified that journey, and then yeah,
Oh, Akatar.
I
Oh,
know. Oh, Akatar.
Akatar.
It is, it, it was a good series, I think, to get back. But yeah, so not to drone on for too much longer, but that's basically my reading journey, and Akatar
Yeah.
was the one that sealed the deal. And I think I read like 40 some books in the year of last year, 2023, which is pretty monumental. Oh my gosh, jeez, brain. Yeah, pretty monumental in the reading of me. Yeah,
Ooh.
words are good. English is great.
Yep. We both love Akatar.
Yes.
I'm also a big Akatar fan, so
Yes.
absolutely.
And yeah, so what about you? How did you become a reader, Cody?
Well, actually, it's funny because you and I have a very similar story. I was also one of those quote unquote gifted kids,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like is so loaded now,
Mm-hmm.
but I was also obsessed with AR. Was it accelerated reading? Is that what it stood
I
for?
think
I
so.
actually don't remember.
I think
Okay.
so.
I actually won an award. I think, number 2 in the state
Oh wow.
for like AR points or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I got a book and I was in the paper.
Oh wow.
Dude, because I'm such a like my the way my personality is, I just like if there's a goal to achieve, I
Mhm.
just really want to achieve it. And so the AR points were like perfect because like, oh, I really want to get this toy that if you have enough points, you get it. And so
Yeah.
I was super obsessed with AR and I always knew what my points were. And that really drove my reading. I read so many different books. I read the Boxcar children's series. I read Animorph was a really popular series when I was a kid, and
Mhm.
I read so many of those. Harry Potter, of
Oh yeah.
course. I read all the Harry Potters. My aunt used to work at Walmart, and we would go to the midnight releases
Oh,
and
those are
get the
fun.
book, which that was so much fun to
Oh
do
my
as a kid.
gosh.
Oh my gosh, I miss those days.
Those are such good days. Honorable mention
Those
for
were.
Borders, RAP.
Oh, we love Borders. Oh man, Borders are so good. I
So
miss
good.
Borders so much. Not that I'm bashing on Barnes and Noble, but Borders was better.
There's something. There was just something so good.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
good.
Yeah. I also read the Lemony Snicket series of unfortunate events. I absolutely loved that series. Still one of my favorite series, even now. I reread them a couple years ago, and they're so good. Um, and so that was kind of my elementary school, middle school. I read so many books. I didn't even know how many I read back then. I would just read a book and then pick the next one up the second I was done. And I was obsessed with reading as much as I could. I read the Aragon series
Yes.
in middle school. Oh, that was such a good
Such a
series
good
too,
series.
man. Yeah. I read Lord of the Rings in middle school, like The Hobbit
Oh, wow.
and the trilogy, because the movies were out when I was in middle school, and everybody talked about them. And my dad was a really big Lord of the Rings fan, and so he had all of them, and I read them all, and it was so much fun to read those. And then when I got into high school, I took a shift and I read almost exclusively Stephen King
Mm.
novels.
Oh, wow.
I started with Carrie, which is the first book he wrote. And it's about, the girl in high school, obviously, with the powers.
Mhm.
And I was so obsessed with that book. And I ended up reading most of his backlog during high school. And the librarian at the high school made fun of me because I would just go to the Stephen King section and pull out a book and read it and then get to the next one. And it was so much fun. I still am a big Stephen King fan. I actually have a bookshelf, just all Stephen King. And it's got almost every book besides maybe the last 5 or 6 years, I would say.
Mhm.
And Stephen King is still, every time I read one of his books, I just feel like I'm wrapped in a blanket because the way he writes just makes me feel like I'm in high school again, even though they're really disturbing books
Right,
and
yeah.
a lot of creepy stuff happens.
The
They're like
nostalgia.
oddly comforting.
The nostalgia, right? The nostalgia.
The nostalgia. And I became a big horror fan. I used to be exclusively Stephen King horror, but now I read a lot of horror because of Stephen King and got really introduced into the horror genre because of him. I really didn't read sci-fi and fantasy outside of like the classic Aragon, Lord of the Rings, because it kind of felt nerdy. Like it was
Mhm.
still not cool to be a nerd when I was a kid. And
Right.
so I didn't read sci-fi or fantasy because I didn't want to be labeled as a nerd, even though I totally was one. Like I was a super nerd, and
We don't wanna
I
be
like no
perceived.
one. Yeah, yeah. I was trying to be cool, but I wasn't at all. I was a super nerd. And I also started college
Mhm.
and totally ruined my reading life.
Yeah.
I went from reading probably about the same amount you were, somewhere between 50 and whatever books a year
Yeah.
to like maybe 5 or 10,
Mhm.
honestly. Like I could probably count on both my hands how many books I read during my undergraduate career. And a lot of them were like, I was a biology major, so they were all like nonfiction biology books. Mary Roach, who's actually a great author, had a book called Stiff that was about corpses, or not corpses, but cadavers and how they were used in a lot of different things. And that was a really great book. There's a lot of DNA related books that came out. So I would read those, but I almost never read fiction, or if I did, it was really rare. And it just wasn't at all like it was when I was a kid.
Mhm. Yeah.
But then the pandemic hit, and I had a lot more time on my hands and was working from home. And
Mhm.
so I looked for a podcast to listen to.
Mm.
Hey, podcast listeners, I have a podcast. It's called the Reading Glasses Podcast. And it's these two girls, Mallory O'Mara and Bria Grant. And their whole podcast is on improving your reading life and helping you be a better reader and just like pro reading. And they were so interesting to listen to, and all the books that they were talking about were books that really sounded fun to me.
Mm.
And so I started reading the books that they recommended and got totally back into reading. And so in 2020, I think I read like 70 books in 2020,
Oh,
starting
wow.
in like May. Like I read so many books that
Dang.
year. Um, and then in 2021, I think I read 100 and something. So it just like I went from zero to the opposite
0
extreme
to
of just
100,
reading.
literally.
Yeah, literally. I'm just reading all the time. And I kind of changed the way I track my reading. So I used to use Goodreads, and now
Mhm.
I use something called the Book Riot 2024 reading log, which is this really dense, Haley's seen it. It's a really
Yeah.
dense Excel sheet, and it has all these stats and charts, and like anything you want to know about your reading life, this chart will tell you,
Mhm.
and I love it. I think that's what makes me read now is I get to fill out the chart. That kind of like makes me excited to fill it out.
It's just like reliving the old elementary days of AR, right? Of
It
freaking
actually is. It honestly
need
is.
those
Like it's
incentives.
so satisfying.
That's so funny. Came full circle.
And I did. I really did. And so now I read a lot of different books. I still read a decent amount of nonfiction. I would say,
Mhm.
I think I could tell you the specific stats if I pulled up my sheet, but probably about 25% of my books are nonfiction and
Okay.
75 are fiction. Um, and I have a pretty diverse genre. I now read sci-fi all the time. Like I
Mhm.
just talked about, the book I just finished was sci-fi. A lot of horror still, a lot of fantasy, and actually a lot of memoirs. I
Mm.
really enjoy memoirs, especially from people who like are going through a disease or had a really hard time growing up. Those books are really interesting to me. I just love hearing other people's perspectives, and
Yeah.
so that's been really really fun for me to get back into. And now I read all the time, and I love it.
Yeah.
So thank you, pandemic, for making me a reader again.
Thanks, pandemic. We appreciate it.
One good thing came from COVID, at least.
Right? Gosh. Yeah. I That's so funny that like cuz so growing up I was a like quote unquote jock, right? Like, and maybe, the younger
Mm,
kids nowadays, they don't use those terms, but like, back in, you know, early 2000s to mid 2000s time, it was like, oh, you're a nerd or you're a jock or you're a, whatever.
yeah.
And I played sports pretty heavily, not just through school, but like club sports. And I like snowboarded and other shenanigans. But I would get to school early, like, as soon as I could. So I would make my mom, like, drop me off hella early in before school if I didn't ride the bus. Um, and then that morphed into once I got my license, I would literally get to school, like, 45 minutes early just so I could sit there and read. And I would sit in the hallways and like even before like teachers would show up. So there's this one English teacher that we had, she'd show up and she'd walk down because you had to like walk down the steps to like it was like a split level in our high school. And you could go up the steps
Oh,
or you could go down the steps. And downstairs were classrooms and upstairs were classrooms. And I would sit on the first level and I would sit like up against a wall that like faced the stairs so I could see if like when my friends were coming, but also the teachers had to walk past me, and literally, if I was, like, gone for a day or if, like, I wasn't in my spot, quote, unquote, like, the teachers would say something to me like, "Oh, like, Haley, I didn't see you the other day, like, were you sick?" Or like, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you here, reading as usual." Literally, it was so it was
oh,
ridiculous.
that's so sweet.
It was, like, really
Oh,
nice, but yeah, I was like, "Oh my gosh." But yeah, just
yeah. When you're a kid in high school, you don't want to hear that from your
oh,
teachers, probably.
yeah, exactly, for sure. I was like, "I have a reputation to uphold here. I am a sports player. I do not read for, like, I'm not no nerd." But, obviously, that's times have changed, and it's, like, kinda cool to read now, which I think is really, really fun and
It is.
refreshing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I was really similar too. I forgot to mention, but I would get to school early and I'd go to the library and I'd
Yeah,
read in the library for like third half an hour, 45 minutes. That was the best part of the day, I thought.
yeah. Our library was
Yeah.
locked, like, at all times. You had to be, like, either with a teacher or, like, you could not just go to
What? That's
at
crazy.
least in high school, yeah. Our Not that our high school was, like, worse for wear or anything, but they did not trust us.
Did you have a librarian
We did.
that was there?
Yeah, yeah, we had
Mm.
I don't remember the librarian in high school, but I was friends with the librarian in elementary and middle school.
I don't remember my elementary. Actually, I don't remember the elementary school. The middle school one, the librarian. I
Mhm.
remember what she looks like,
Yeah.
and I forget what they called it, but I was like a librarian TA in
Mm,
middle school,
mhm.
and it was me and this other gal who we were terrible TAs. We did barely anything, and all we did was just mess around and have fun. And we were both readers too, so we read all the time. And she ended up giving us an award, like
Mhm.
for like best TA or
Aw,
something, for the end of our
that's
like
so
eighth grade or
cool.
whatever it was. Uh, even though I can't remember her name, shout out if you're listening to this and you know who I am. Thank you for being a good librarian. And then in high school, we had a really cool librarian named Mr. Fowler, who was this like long gray hair, big bushy Gandalf beard.
Hmm.
And he was so much fun to talk to. And he drank a French press of coffee every day, and he always carried it around with him. It was so much
Oh
fun.
my
I really
gosh,
liked him.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Our librarian in
Yeah. He was really,
our librarian in middle school was like literally your stereotypical librarian. And I forget her name now, but she was like older for sure. Like probably nearing more so nearing retirement. And like so I have a sibling that's like 8 years older than me, and she was there when he was in school.
mm,
And so she had like the brightest red lipstick. She always wore like your typical like librarian spectacles where they had the like chain, and she was this little petite like maybe 5 foot lady, and she had like a cropped hair, and it was she always wore red lipstick though, and she always wore little like sweater, like little sweater jackets, and like a pencil skirt, very very neat, very library. It was so cute. And I was just like,
oh, wow.
she is so cute. And I don't remember how much longer she stayed with our school, but she was there when still there, I think, when I graduated. So, but yeah, she was neat.
That's really nice.
Very strict
Yeah.
librarian though. She was very adamant about us shutting the heck up when we were in the library.
Shout out to the school librarians, man.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unspoken heroes, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Well, now that we've introduced our kind of reading history, let's talk about
Mhm.
what reading habits we have or reading quirks that we have. Do you want to go first, Haley?
Yeah, I'll go first. So like kind of as I mentioned at the very beginning, I dual read or simul read or whatever the heck you want to call it. I'm trying really hard not to cuss, but
I think we're going to have an
so
explicit rating on this podcast. So,
oh good, good. Awesome. Yeah, because I'm really trying to, hone in my potty mouth.
yeah.
Um, but so I dual read, and typically I'll be reading at least 2 books at a time. It was for a little bit like a paperback and a e-reader
Hmm.
of some sort. But when I was younger, I was a staunch like e-readers are the devil, like they're ruining our society, like just typical teenage angst type person. Um, where I was very vehemently against e-readers because I was so afraid that real tangible books would cease to exist.
Hmm.
Um, Mind you, I feel like that was pretty common in like the early 2000s with the whole like booming of tech because we didn't know like what tech would replace. Um, so I think that's where that fear came from.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I really loved, and the smell of books. Let me just tell you, the smell of a fresh printed. You walk into that library or you walk into like your bookshelves, and that just I don't know how to even explain it, but
Oh,
that
yeah.
smell of
Mm.
books, of printed paper, just it just does it for me, you know?
Yeah.
And so I always just loved, and it's also kind of nice to see like a tangible evidence, right, of like how much you've read or your bookshelf, that sort of thing. But yeah, so now with to give myself some more ease throughout my day because I do work full time and like, day to day, it's a lot easier for me to read. I use iBooks, which is like Apple Books on my iPhone, and then I'll use that. And then last year for my birthday, my husband got me a Kindle. I think it was like the paper white e-reader. Excuse me, sorry. And since then, I read books all the time now on that thing. But yeah, those are my reading habits, and I do dual read on those now. I'll have one book going on my iPhone sometimes, and one book on my Kindle. So, like for instance, right now, currently, I'm reading Crossed on my Kindle and Iron Flame on my iPhone. So,
Wow.
you know, Yeah.
I struggle reading on my phone. I'm not very good at it.
I I find it a lot easier, like, so if I'm, like, taking the dogs out or if I, like, because I feel like I'm a smaller person, so my hands just cannot, they get
Yeah.
so tired of, like, holding things.
Yeah.
Like, the Kindle is kind of big, and not that I would want it any freaking smaller because I think that they're already small enough, but, like, it's, yeah, my iPhone's just ease, and I find that I stay off of things like social media and whatnot a lot better if I have a book that I'm reading on
So
my phone.
I actually get distracted. I think that's what my problem is I get distracted by like,
Mm,
oh, something pops up on my phone. I got to check it right away. And so I also use an e-reader. And with that, it's only dedicated
mhm,
to books. And so if I'm not looking at my phone, then it's easier. But phones, yeah, I just
mhm.
struggle with them. I don't know. I guess that's it. That must be it.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
distracting, I'll tell you. That's my reading habits, and mostly fantasy and romance for me, you know?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I read currently.
So you're a fan of the romantasy, the new genre that everybody's talking about right now?
Oh, yeah, and listen, I'm pretty picky about, because I've spent some time on some fan fiction sites. I won't name which ones, but I'm not Wattpad. I'll just say that, not Wattpad.
Is Wattpad
um,
good or is it like different? I don't know
in
anything
my
about fanfic.
opinion, it's not good. In my opinion, it's not good. But I've found like some of the most beautifully written books, essentially. I mean, they are amazing, well written, and these people take time out of their days to like write novels, truly, series, even, um, like edit and all that jazz. And yeah, I forgot where I was going with that, but I read, oh, fan fiction. So there's some spicy stuff out there. Let me tell you, there's some weird stuff, in my opinion. But I like, so I kind of feel like I have a little bit of a, uh, higher opinion of some of the way that certain scenes are written.
Hmm.
Um, Not necessarily that it's like bad, but and I definitely have some like cringe words where I'm like, if that is in that, if it's written in a scene and it's cringe as hell, I will not read it.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah.
It's too much, right? Like, nope. They give me the biggest ick, and I'm like, can't finish it. Sorry.
That's true.
But yeah, so that's yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of similar reading habits. I'm also now a big e-reader. I use a different brand than Kindle. I use a Kobo, which is supposed to be like the hipster, not Amazon, but it's owned by Walmart. So I feel like it's just the same thing. And I used to be a really strong physical reader too. Like I also hated e-readers. I have a good friend who runs a local bookstore here where I live, and we were
Mhm.
always like, "Don't ever do an e-reader. You're ruining the book industry." I did
Yeah.
have a Kindle Fire for a little bit, and I hated it. It was so hard
Mhm.
to read on. It was heavy. The screen reflected really. I mean, it was like a tablet, so the screen
Yeah.
reflected, and I think that's why I also don't read well on my phone. Like if I'm out
Mhm.
in the world reading, the the light's distracted on my phone, so I don't like to do it. But I really struggled with the Kindle Fire, and I just hated the idea of ebooks. And then probably, I think maybe last year, I bought myself the Kobo to try it out because I was
Mhm.
reading on a different tablet using the Kindle app and kind of got into it a little bit more, especially for bigger books like the heavy fantasy books.
Mhm.
Because as I get older, my hands cramp up like from carpal tunnel. So
Right.
I can't read a
I
book.
hear
I
that.
can't hold a book the same way I used to be able to, unfortunately. And so I did that and eventually got the Kobo. And now I pretty much only read on the Kobo. I actually just started a physical book today for the first time in a while.
Mm.
And so mostly e-reader. I also do a lot of audiobooks. Um,
Mhm.
I read a lot of my books come from the library, and there's this app called Libby, which I can get ebooks, but also audiobooks. And I love to listen to nonfiction books, especially memoirs that are written and read by the
Mm.
author or Any sort of nonfiction book is really good to just listen to on my way to work or when I'm working in the lab doing whatever I need to do. All that stuff is pretty easy to listen to an audiobook. And so I do a decent amount of audiobooks. And comics. I actually got into comics last year after once again fighting like the super nerd. Like I didn't want to be the person who read comic books because they're nerdy and lame. But I finally got over it and went into this local comic book store called Captain Comics, and they were so nice and helpful, and they introduced me to books or comics that are not superhero related because I hate superhero books or movies. I have no interest in them whatsoever. But I've read so many good comic series that are not in the superhero genre, and I love them now. And I have probably like 3 or 5 series that I'm reading every month now from comics that are really good. So that's great. Like I said, I'm a big genre fiction. So sci-fi, fantasy, horror, those are like my 3 big genre fictions categories every year. And I love to book track. Like I mentioned, I'm going to talk about it a lot on this podcast. I am obsessed with tracking my reading. It is like my favorite thing to do. I've been doing the book riot ever since I started rereading since the pandemic. So I don't know if I started it in 2020, but this will be my 4th year book tracking with the Excel
Wow.
sheet. And I love going back to previous years and comparing to what I'm doing this year. I am just obsessed with looking at all this data. So that's like my favorite thing in the world to do with my reading life.
Yeah, I bet that's so satisfying though, like at the end of the year, looking back and like seeing all the progress made.
It is. And I like to see, like, in 2022, I read, whatever, 20% sci-fi. And this year I read 35%
Right.
sci-fi or, stuff like that. It's just really fun to be able to compare and
Yeah.
see what things you ended up liking more and things you got rid of. It's just really fun.
Data analytics.
Love it. Love it. And do you track your reading now or have you
I
before?
do. I no, I never tracked my reading before. So I actually did Goodreads because I that's all I knew about.
Yeah.
And I actually went back and like tried to look up a bunch of old books that I could remember off the top of my head, and then I just threw them in my have read pile. So in my like have read section, it has like 90 books or something. I'm sure there's tons more that I've read
Oh yeah.
outside of that,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, last year was the first year that I tracked it, and the only reason why I tracked it was because I was curious if I could read like 100 books in a year. Obviously, that didn't happen, uh, but it was kind of cool. Yeah, it was nice seeing my progress. And now this year, my plan is 101 books.
Oh.
I'm trying really hard, but let me tell you, Iron Flame has really cut back on my reading
That's such a beefy book.
because it took me way too long. It's so beefy, so much. But yeah. So yeah, that's what I've been
Those damn
using it
big
for.
fantasy books.
I
Yeah.
know. They're so yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't have a
Yeah.
Goodreads before this year, last year?
Mhm. Last year,
That's
yeah.
crazy. I've had one since like
Mhm.
2010, I think.
Wow.
I don't know when it started. I feel like a couple years after it started, I got into it and I used it almost exclusively. Probably it would have been like last year of high school through my
Mhm.
college. So it wasn't like I used it a lot because I wasn't reading that much. But yeah, I had a Goodreads. I've had a Goodreads for a long time, especially to track what I want to read.
Yeah.
I use it for that
That's
a lot.
also really
Yeah,
nice.
I like that.
I do also use that. And in the iBooks on my iPhone, I do have it's fairly user friendly. Unfortunately, it doesn't have all books.
Mm.
Sometimes I will go look up a book to put on my phone to read, and it won't be there for whatever reason. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe the author just doesn't have it published through them or whatever. But I also use it for tracking my to reads because I can just hit a little button and it says like I want to read or to read or whatever the hell.
Oh,
And yeah, and it also, which is kind of cool for me, it lets you preview books. So it'll give you like 30 pages or something
oh,
of
wow.
a book. Yeah. So I can like kind of before I commit to reading a book, um, I can read a little chunk of it to see if I like the writing style, that sort of thing, which is really nice. I don't do it all the time because I do sometimes like to be surprised by books to see if I like them or not. But yeah, that's one. I do like that aspect about that particular app, I guess.
I think so I use a Kobo app, which is like the Kindle, whatever. And I think they give you a preview, but I've never tried it. I've never read a
Mm.
preview, which is something I guess I didn't talk about, but I hate spoilers with a passion. And when I pick out a book, I base
Mhm.
it solely on whether someone's recommended it to me or the cover. I
Mhm.
don't read the bio for the book. I don't
Mhm.
look it up and see what it's about. I just go based off of like the feel of the book.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
yeah, so I don't know if I could
I
do a
hear that.
preview. I mean, you're starting the book, so I guess it wouldn't be like a spoiler.
Yeah, I'd say probably like 95% of the time that I continue reading the book, I just purchase it because there is like a if you want to
Oh
keep
yeah,
reading, purchase this
yeah,
book. And it's like, yeah, okay, I'll purchase it. There was one series, and I'm not gonna name the series, but there was one series where I previewed it and I was like, abso-freaking-lutely not.
yeah,
So yeah, there there's been a couple times, but yeah, it's helpful for me because I don't like committing my time to, you know, these giant books that I
yeah.
end up not like, like there's nothing worse than like getting halfway through or, a first chapter and you're like, well, okay. I don't like I don't like not finishing books, I guess is my
You don't
point.
like to
I like
DNF
finishing
books at
books.
all? Hmm.
No, I really don't. I've only DNF'd like 3 books in my entire like book reading. I will suffer through a
What?
book just just to finish it because what if it gets better, right? Like I always hold out hope that what if it gets better?
I I dumped a book. It was the end of this last year, since we're in the new year. 60% in, and I just
Oh
dumped it.
wow.
And it was a good book. I won't say what it is because I feel like when I say I dumped it, I didn't like it. It just wasn't the vibe I wanted to read at that time, so I just moved on. It
Right.
was also kind of a big book too, and I was in the
Hmm.
post Iron Flame slump, Fourth Wing and Iron Flame slump,
Mm.
and so I just really wasn't in the mood for something else. And it was kind of a similar story, so um, it was just too much for me to read at that time. But yeah, I'll DNF a book anytime. I'll just throw it away, just throw it straight in the trash and just let it go.
Throw it
Yeah,
straight in the door. In the bin.
in the
In the
bin.
bin right now.
But I used to not ever not finish a book. I guess that's a weird way to say it, but yeah,
Yeah.
it used to be pretty. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Is there anything else? Any other quirks that you want to mention that you haven't already?
Mm. Not that I
I'm
can think
sure
of.
they're going to come out as we talk more on the podcast. So, but
Exactly,
it's ironic
exactly.
that we read similarly. Similarly, is that a word?
Yes.
Um,
Yes,
similarly,
similarly. Yes.
it
Words
is.
are
Yeah,
hard.
but we have different genres and different um, like dialects,
Mhm.
but we actually are pretty similar when it comes to like the mechanism of reading, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really cool.
So I think we can finish with, because we've been going for quite a while, about just the
Yeah.
things that we're going to do on the podcast and not do on the podcast.
Mhm.
And I think one of them that
Yeah.
we're not going to do is talk negatively about books.
Right.
Because, for one, the listener, you might really enjoy the book we're talking about. And we don't want to make you feel bad for if you really love this book and we didn't for whatever reason. Everybody likes books for
Mhm.
different reasons and doesn't like books for different reasons. So we're not going to be negative. We might maybe say like the book wasn't for
Yeah.
us, but we're not going to bash a book unless it's like maybe if it's super hateful, like racist or something, maybe we'll mention it. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I agree.
definitely won't be like yucking anybody's yum on this podcast. And
Yes.
we will not be spoilery most of the time, but we might talk about one book in particular and then be spoilery for that episode. So if
Hmm.
if we'll tell you if we do get spoilery, and we don't want to
Yes.
ruin your experience if you also hate spoilers like I do. So we'll make sure to make it clear, but we will not be spoilery for the books that we mention outside of those specific episodes. Yeah, and
Mhm.
we do have an email. It's called booksandbeespod@gmail.com. Booksandbeespod@gmail.com. We're also going to have show notes at the bottom of this podcast, wherever you're listening to. So we'll put it in there too. And then our Instagram page. Do you want to tell us what the Instagram is again, Hailey?
Yes, it's Books and the Bees Pod. All one word, no numbers or any symbols.
Cool. And we'll put that in the show notes as well, so people can link it. So feel free to follow us or email us if you have any questions. We would love to have listener emails. I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah. That would
So
be cool.
write us an email if you're listening to this right now. Open up your computer.
Yes.
Send us an email. Even if it just says hi. If it just says hi, just send it. It's cool. We'll love it.
Yeah. Say hi.
Follow us. Say hi.
Say hi.
Yeah. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
No. I don't think so.
Well, thank you so much for doing this podcast with me, Hailey. I think it's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Woo.
I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this literary journey as much as we did. Remember, just like bees gather nectar to create honey, we gather the finest stories to sweeten your day. If you're buzzing with excitement, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a high five-worthy review. Until next time, happy reading, and may your shelves be filled with tales as enchanting as a blooming garden. Keep the buzz alive, and we'll catch you in the next chapter. Bye for now.
Bye.